It's late, I know, but I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're traveling somewhere deep far past the neon of your phone screen. Past that there is a stretch of river in the western Amazon basin that does not appear on tourist brochures. It doesn't wind through a preserved national park, nor is it marked by placards telling you the names of endangered frogs. It doesn't even have a proper name in Portuguese, which is to say it does not exist in the usual ways. To the people who live along its banks, however, it has many names. Some secret, some sung, some that change, depending on what the river has done that year. There are stories of the water rising and swallowing entire groves of banana trees, only to spit them out again a mile downstream, unharmed and still flowering. If you try to chart it on a GPS, the signal will fail you. It won't crash, it'll just hum. Like the machine is unsure if it's being lied to. This is where we begin. The Yanomami people, among the most well-known and often misrepresented indigenous tribes of the Amazon, live in areas like this, and their lives, as much as we try to study or preserve them, are often understood through a glass so distorted it becomes surreal. Outsiders arrive expecting to find noble savages or eco-warriors, and are surprised instead to find men arguing about gossip, women laughing at penis jokes, and teenagers bored out of their minds. In other words, people, just people. But in a world where boots rot in a week and everything has teeth, the word people takes on new meaning. There are no streets here, no hours, no hinges or windows or locks. A home is not a private place. It is round, open, and shared. The communal structure, known as a yano or shabono, houses up to 400 people under a single roof. It is both shelter and stage, a place for dreams, quarrels, storytelling, childbirth, and grief. If someone is crying, they are not alone. If someone is dying, they are surrounded. There are no mirrors either, at least not the kind you can hang. So children grow up never quite knowing what their face looks like. But they do know the sounds of the forest and the look in their grandmother's eye when a story has gone too long. Every year, outsiders visit, anthropologists, missionaries, occasionally oil prospectors. Some bring malaria, some bring notebooks, a few bring gifts, metal pots, machetes, radios. The Yanomami accepts what they like, reject what they don't. They are not frozen in time, they are adapting, but not always in the ways we expect. Sometimes they wear soccer jerseys with feathers in their hair. Sometimes they play soccer naked, and sometimes they do neither, and just sit in silence while the jungle breathes around them. What would it be like to live without clocks, without advertising, without shoes? We're not here to romanticize, only to wonder. Satellite maps and the flight paths of drones. We're going somewhere the world has tried very hard to forget. This story begins in the Amazon rainforest, not the click-and-ship empire, but the original one made of leaves the size of dinner plates, rivers that look like molten coffee, and skies thick with sound. We'll explore what life is really like in Amazonian tribes, past the tourist myths, and into the heart of what it means to live far from the world that shaped us. Worms in your foot, spears in your hand, and jaguars in the trees, but also quiet laughter, the ache of memory, and rituals that make our modern lives feel oddly hollow. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, feel free to subscribe, but only if it feels right. No pressure, ever. And if you're up for it, let me know where in the world you're listening from, or what time it is right now. Dim the lights, and let's drift back in time. There is something strangely humbling about holding a handmade spear. not a decorative one from a museum. A real one smoothed by calloused hands, its tip blackened by fire and resin. Balanced, not for ceremony, but for survival. You hold it, and suddenly your limbs feel clumsy, your posture wrong. You realize your wrists have only ever known keyboards, steering wheels, plastic forks. The spear, however, was made to fly. Among many Amazonian tribes, boys are taught to throw from a young age, not just to hunt, but to prove readiness, maturity, even affection. One of the oldest courtship rituals is the sharing of a spear. It says, "I can feed you, I can protect us, I am not a boy anymore." But to the outside world, the spear is not a gift. It is a threat. In 2008, a widely circulated photo showed a group of indigenous people aiming arrows at a low-flying aircraft. They were painted red eyes like slits against the sun, mouths open in alarm or warning. The image went viral, uncontacted tribe discovered, splashed across news headlines like a prehistoric miracle. What most people didn't know was that the tribe had been discovered years earlier. They knew what planes were. They weren't shocked by the technology. They were aiming their arrows because they were sick of being watched. Sick of strangers in the sky. Imagine that. Imagine growing up in a forest so dense that it takes 2 hours to walk a mile and yet knowing, somehow, that you are being watched from above. That your image might be posted, memed, dissected, sold. All while your name, your language, your fears are left out entirely. It's not the jungle that's alien, it's us. Some anthropologists call it chronological vertigo, that jarring dissonance when you realize people can live in the same year, the same planet, but completely different worlds. A tribal elder sharpening a poisoned dart in a clearing. A Wall Street trader refreshing a stock app at lunch. Both alive in the same moment, both completely unaware of the other's heartbeat. But the elder, if he wanted to, could learn your ways. He could move to the city, watch your films, learn your tongue, trade the spear for a smartphone. Could you do the same? Could you walk into his world, barefoot and wordless, and survive? We often ask what they can learn from us. But what if we are the ones who've forgotten? Forgotten how to listen, how to share, how to sit with silence and not feel the need to fill it. There is no Wi-Fi in the Amazon, but there is communication. There are spirits in the leaves. There are warnings in bird calls, affection in the way someone passes you a gourd of chicha, a fermented drink that tastes like earth and effort. To learn this language, you must stop speaking. You must stop assuming. You must be still. If you walk long enough in the Amazon, the forest begins to change you. Not in the poetic sense, not yet. First, it humbles you physically. Your boots will rot. Your socks will mildew in your pack. Your skin, despite your best efforts, will host things. The rainforest is a place where nature is not scenic, it is participatory. It enters you. There is a parasite, Dermatobia harmonis, that lays its eggs on mosquitoes. When the mosquito bites you, the eggs are deposited under your skin. A few days later, you'll feel a twitch beneath the surface of your flesh, and then a small hole. Not painful, exactly, just alive. That's a botfly larva feeding on your tissue. It breathes through that hole. In the cities, this is cause for panic. Surgery, antibiotics, drama. But among many tribal groups, it is simply handled. A vine is burned. Smoke is coaxed. The worm is drawn out gently with fingers or a wooden pick, and the person laughs about it later, as if it were a splinter or a bruise. Pain, here, is not a scandal. It is just another form of participation. There are plants to treat infection, sap to numb a wound, frogs with secretions so potent they induce violent purging and sometimes visions. The jungle is both doctor and illness. Everything heals you and tests you in turn. You begin to understand that discomfort is not an enemy. Western life has taught us to flee pain at all costs. Pain is to be managed, masked, medicated. But in these communities, pain has texture. It has narrative. A boy who endures the sting of bullet ants in his initiation ceremony is not a victim. He is a vessel for strength, for memory, for adulthood. There is a story among the Takuna people about a girl who fell ill and in her fever spoke to the jaguar spirit. When she recovered, she was different. She could see the dreams of others. They called her a shaman, not because she was chosen by elders, but because she had been touched by suffering. Imagine if we treated trauma that way, not as a scar to hide, but as a path to wisdom. It's not to glorify it. The jungle is not kind. Children die from infected cuts. Women hemorrhage in childbirth. An unexpected flood can erase a village. But no one is pretending otherwise. There are no motivational slogans painted on walls. No health apps tracking hydration. Just a daily, honest negotiation with survival. And oddly, it makes people less anxious. When your life is tied to the land, your problems are visible, tangible, fixable, or fatal, but never vague, never a ghost in your inbox. In the city, we suffer privately, in therapy, in traffic, in fluorescent, lit cubicles. We name our anxiety, but cannot locate it. Here, in the forest, fear has shape. A snake, a jaguar, a parasite, and once named it can be faced. From the outside, life in the Amazonian tribes can seem relentlessly severe. Predators, parasites, no plumbing, no payday. But what surprises most visitors, those who come with open eyes, and not just cameras, is how much people laugh. The laughter is not polite or restrained. It is full-bodied, unashamed, and constant. A man with a spear in his hand will burst out laughing because someone tripped over a root. A grandmother will chuckle while grinding cassava, recounting a dream that made no sense. Children will chase each other, naked and shrieking, through the undergrowth until they collapse in giggles. There's a kind of irreverence to it. A cosmic joke shared quietly between those who know how absurd survival is. Among the Pirahu people, famously studied for their unique linguistic structures, humor is integral to conversation. If someone tells a story that ends badly, they might still laugh as they say it, as if the pain was worth the punchline, as if to say, well, at least I'm still here. There's a word in one tribe's language, translatable, like all the best words, that means something like laughing at your misfortune, because it proves you're alive. Not cruelty, not schadenfreude, just a shared acknowledgement of how stupid and beautiful it is to be human. What Westerners often mistake for stoicism is sometimes just a different kind of joy. In cities, joy is marketed. You must earn it, schedule it, perform it. In the forest, joy is ambient. It arrives uninvited, like a sudden breeze, or a mango falling from the tree when you're not looking. Of course, there is also sadness, deep, echoing grief. When someone dies, the mourning is not brief. Songs are sung, ashes are worn. Sometimes, the name of the dead is never spoken again. In some communities, the bones are crushed and consumed with plantains, not out of morbidity, but out of love. To keep the person inside the living, to say, you will not go far. It is raw, it is intimate, it is not made for documentaries. Westerners, when they visit, often ask the same questions. What do they eat? How do they hunt? Do they believe in God? Rarely do they ask, what makes you laugh? What breaks your heart? Because those are the questions that dissolve the illusion of difference. A woman in a beaded necklace still grieves like you do. A boy with a bow still blushes when he likes someone. An old man still watches the rain like it might reveal a memory he forgot to write down. We want the tribes to be either tragic or noble, but most days they are neither. They are ordinary, and that, perhaps, is the most extraordinary thing of all. If you've ever read about Amazonian tribes in a textbook, stumbled upon a documentary with dramatic narration and swelling drums, you've probably heard the familiar tropes: primitive, unspoiled, close to nature. These phrases are not lies, exactly, but they are incomplete, sanitized, flattened into myth. Because what's often left out are the contradictions. There are tribes that welcome visitors, and tribes that shoot at helicopters. Tribes that use smartphones when they can get signal, and tribes that have never seen glass. Communities that practice elaborate spiritual rituals, and communities that fight bitterly over who left the fishing net tangled. There are internal conflicts, petty feuds, gossip, accusations of sorcery. One group might despise another just across the river, and not even remember why. In other words, again, they are people, not symbols. Western fascination with the tribal is old. It's a mirror we like to polish, to see what we've lost, or what we imagine we've escaped. Some seek purity, others danger, but very few want the truth. And the truth is this: there is no such thing as untouched. The rubber barons came, the gold miners, the missionaries with silver crosses, the anthropologists with notebooks, the men with chainsaws, the corporations with contracts. Even the tribes that resist contact live in response to it, moving deeper into the forest, changing hunting routes, learning to disappear. Imagine living a life that is always framed by someone else's curiosity. Imagine your existence being cited in lawsuits, used in climate debates, or printed in biology textbooks, and yet you've never been asked what you think about the stars. One of the most beautiful things I've ever read came from an interview with a tribal elder. When asked about climate change, he didn't speak about policy or science. He said, simply, the sky used to be bluer. The birds used to argue more. There is knowledge in that. Not data, but wisdom. We often assume knowledge must be extracted, organized, tested. But there are other ways of knowing. Ways that come through dreams, or silence, or the way a leaf curls before a storm. The things we leave out of stories, of maps, of conversations, are often the most important. And the more we frame these lives as distant or strange, the more we excuse ourselves from learning what they can teach. Not about how to survive a jungle, but how to live within one. With others, with memory, with loss. The forest does not explain itself, it just grows. And the people who live in it, they do not perform for us. They simply are. We're the ones who keep asking the wrong questions. And yet, we keep looking. Maybe because, deep down, we miss the part of ourselves that still knows how to listen. It is a romantic idea that somewhere, beyond the edge of the road, there are people untouched by modern life. We imagine them like museum dioramas, unchanged, pure, suspended in a time capsule of bark loincloths and sacred dances, unaware of TikTok or GDP or antidepressants. But isolation is not a natural state. It is an imposed one. Many of the so-called uncontacted tribes are, in truth, post-contact tribes groups who fled into deeper forests to escape disease, violence, or slavery. They did not grow up without civilization. they ran from it. Their silence is not ignorance, it is protection. In the early 20th century, rubber magnates descended upon the Amazon like colonial ghosts in linen suits. With them came a frenzy of extraction and a trail of horrors. Entire communities were enslaved, children were taken, languages erased in the name of profit. The forest has grown over many of those sites now, but the trauma lingers like roots underfoot, twisted, buried, but still there. When a tribe chooses not to speak to outsiders, it is not an act of mystery, it is an act of memory. And yet we persist in telling ourselves the same bedtime story, that these people are untouched, unsullied, that they are happier because they lack what we have. This fantasy comforts us. It suggests that we've made our world complicated unnecessarily, that maybe, just maybe, there's a simpler way, a truer life. But this binary primitive versus modern, natural versus artificial is a lie we tell to avoid nuance. The truth is that these communities are not resisting modernity. They are navigating it on their own terms. They take what they need. They reject what they don't. They debate. They change. They regret. They adapt. A tribe may use plastic buckets, but reject schooling. They may drink Coca-Cola, but refuse vaccines. They may wear watches, but laugh at calendars. Their choices are not inconsistent. They are complicated, just like yours. There's a tribe in the Brazilian Amazon, the Ajoa, known for their exceptional skill in moving silently through the forest. They can walk through leaf litter without making a sound. They teach this to their children, not as a survival tactic, but as a form of respect. Respect for the spirits, for the animals, for the stories that live in trees. Imagine if that was how we measured intelligence, not by test scores, but by how quietly you could move through the world, how gently you could tread on a living thing. The idea of the isolated Eden, then, is not just false, it is cruel, because it freezes real, breathing people into symbols. It denies them the right to evolve, to be messy, to make mistakes. It's the same kind of thinking that flattens our own lives. You are not a brand. You are not a productivity machine. You are a story, still unfolding, and so are they. There's an old proverb whispered among the elders of a northern Amazonian tribe, roughly translates to, "When a word dies, the wind forgets how to sing it." It sounds poetic, but it's also a quiet emergency. Every few weeks, somewhere in the Amazon basin, a language dies. Not because of war or natural disaster, not because the people who spoke it have vanished, but because the last person who knew its lullabies or names for moonlight simply stopped speaking them, and no one else remembered to ask. There are over 300 indigenous languages in the Amazon. Some are tonal, some are whistled, some have no word for time and dozens for rain. In one tongue, the verb for to know and to feel is the same because how could you ever separate them? To lose a language is not to lose a vocabulary. It is to lose a worldview, a grammar of thought, an entire way of being. In the West, we speak of endangered languages, like relics, something to preserve, to archive, maybe put in a museum. But in these communities, language is not static. It sings, it dances, it flirts, it curses, it raises children and buries the dead. It doesn't just describe the forest, it participates in it. The Yamanao people, for instance, speak of the forest as if it's listening. When gathering food, they avoid boasting. They speak in code or whisper to the trees, because the forest, they believe, can be jealous. If you disrespect it, it might hide its gifts from you. That's not superstition, that's etiquette, and it's not so different from us. We talk to our cars. We thank the moon on Instagram. We say touch wood or knock on wood, forgetting where the ritual came from. These are remnants, fragments of older grammars, echoes of when we too believed the world was not mute. But the languages of the Amazon are more than echoes. They are living instruments, and they are silenced not just by time, but by pressure. Governments pressure children into Portuguese or Spanish. Missionaries teach only the Bible's tongue. Smartphones flood the ears with global sounds, squeezing out the syllables of home. And yet, there are revivals. Tiny, stubborn miracles. A teenager starts writing poetry in her grandmother's dialect. A hunter records bird calls and names them in his father's tongue. A teacher relearns a word she'd forgotten since childhood and uses it to name her newborn. Language, like the forest, can regrow, slowly, unexpectedly, if there is care. But only if we stop treating it as trivia and start listening like it matters. Because when a word dies, yes, the wind forgets how to sing it. But sometimes, if you're very still, you can still hear its echo, faint, laughing, waiting to be remembered. Children in the Amazonian rainforest grow up without mirrors but not without reflection. They watch themselves in the behavior of other sin, the way an aunt sings a lullaby, or a brother learns to trap fish, or a grandmother holds her grief without apology. Childhood here is not a preparatory stage, is a participation. You are in the world from the moment you can stand. There are no strollers, no playgrounds with rubber mats. The jungle is the playground. The riverbank is the sandbox. A fruit pit becomes a toy, a beetle, a companion, sometimes an enemy. But children are not coddled. They are watched, yes, but not hovered over. A toddler may wander barefoot into a thicket, and no one rushes to stop her. The adults nearby will keep an eye, of course, but unless real danger presents itself, they wait. They trust the child to learn by living. It is not negligence, it is confidence. And from this confidence, something astonishing blooms. Independence without arrogance. A 4-year-old might gut a fish. A 6-year-old might paddle a canoe alone. A 10-year-old might be trusted with fire. And yet, childhood is not rushed. There is no pressure to grow up fastly, to grow in rhythm, to listen, to mimic, to stumble. Adults do not lecture much. They demonstrate. If a boy mishandles a bow, no one yells. The elder just chuckles and shoots a fish clean from the water. It's not instruction, it's invitation. And stories, oh, the stories. In the evenings, when the air thickens with mosquitoes and smoke from cooking fires curls into the canopy, the children gather around the storytellers. Not all stories are myths. Some are gossip, some are jokes, some are warnings dressed as dreams. One might be about a girl who laughed at her spirit and lost her voice. Another about a jaguar who disguised himself as a man and married a village girl. Or about a tree that hums if you listen with your belly, not your ears. There is a pattern to the telling, a rhythm. Children learn to wait for the twist, to listen not just with attention, but with imagination. The stories do not end with morals. They end with silence, or laughter, or a sideways glance. In that silence, children learn something most of us forget, that mystery is not always meant to be solved. Sometimes it is meant to be carried, and it stays with them. Even as they age and take on new roles, hunter, mother, singer, elder, that sense of wonder tinged with mischief never fully fades. In the West, we often speak of inner children, wounded or whimsical, hidden beneath layers of stress and protocol. But here, the child is never buried. He grows taller, she grows wiser. but they remain in the smoke and light of the fire, listening for stories that don't end. Just pause and let that sit for a moment. There's a kind of logic in the Amazon that doesn't map neatly onto Western reason. Call it jaguar logic. It doesn't move in straight lines. It doesn't prioritize clarity. It circles, it waits, it strikes when you're not looking. It's not irrational, but it is, perhaps, more than rational. To many Amazonian tribes, the world is not made of objects. It is made of relationships. Every plant, animal, spirit, and river has agency. It listens, it decides, it remembers. A jaguar is not just a predator. It is a person wearing jaguar clothes, just as a human is a person wearing human clothes. The difference is not essence, but perspective. This idea is often called perspectivism, a kind of forest metaphysics found in several indigenous belief systems. It suggests that animals and spirits see the world as we do, but from their own cultural angle. A monkey sees fruit as food. A jaguar sees it as meat. Each creature thinks its view is the center of the world. Sound familiar? It's not unlike how humans live. Each of us convinced our inner world is the baseline, the template, the truth. But in the forest, this isn't narcissism. It's the beginning of empathy. To survive, you must imagine how others see. Not just think, but see. To track a monkey, you must become one. To avoid a snake, you must know its rhythm. To pick the right vine for medicine, you must listen like a plant. This isn't poetic fancy. It's practical spirituality. The forest rewards humility. It punishes arrogance. It asks, can you recognize yourself in another shape? One elder, when asked how he became a shaman, said, "The spirits taught me through mosquitoes." He didn't mean it metaphorically. He meant he lay in the dark for days, feverish, listening. Each bite a question, each itch a lesson, until he stopped resisting, until he began to hear language in the buzzing. Can you imagine that kind of faith? Not the kind that tells you what to believe, but the kind that teaches you how to perceive. In the West, we separate faith from fact. Here, they breathe together. To believe in something is not to insist on it, but to interact with it respectfully. A tree is not sacred because it's tall or old. It's sacred because someone dreamed of it, or because it once fed a grandmother in a famine, or because its bark sings in the rain. It is sacred because it participates. And that participation, the willingness to be part of something unseen, is the foundation of Amazonian spirituality. There are no temples, no formal prayers, only ritual and rhythm and reciprocity. You give, you receive, you listen, you wait. And sometimes, in that waiting, a jaguar passes silently behind you and does not strike, because you understood the logic, because you were, for a moment, more than yourself. Somewhere in the heart of the Amazon, a man sharpens a machete beside a tree older than any written word. He doesn't know what year it is. Not exactly. The concept matters less than the light of the day, the weight of the air, and the sound of birds that have returned after their yearly absence. His body knows what season it is. His hands know when the soil is ready. His sleep is dictated not by clocks, but by the rain. This is not ignorance. It is another kind of literacy, one we, perhaps, have lost. We measure our lives in months, milestones, and app notifications. We fill calendars with boxes and panic when they're not filled. We try to be productive, connected, informed. But the forest does not measure time in this way. It breathes in cycles: wet, dry, bloom, decay. The stories here are not linear, they are circular. A snake sheds its skin. A tree bears fruit. A fire scars the land, and from the ash, orchids bloom. Among the Ashaninka, there's no fixed word for goodbye. Only words for returning, for distance, for leaving temporarily, because nothing truly ends. Everything comes back around, even grief. They do not fear forgetting, but they fear not being remembered. Not in the way of history books, but in the way a certain tree might remind someone of a cousin who laughed like thunder, or how a river bend looks like the arm of a mother long past. Memory is woven into landscape. You don't tell it to revisit it. In these communities, land is not property, it is biography, a living library of things felt and seen and heard. One elder once said, "The forest is our grandmother. She sings to us when we are afraid. When she falls silent, when the chainsaws arrive, something is lost that cannot be named in policy or profit. It's not just the loss of species or oxygen or shade. It's the loss of memory. And when memory dies, empathy withers. Because the stories we don't hear, the ones buried under concrete or behind screens, those are the ones that could have saved us. Not by solving our problems, but by softening our questions. Modern life teaches us to forget quickly, to swipe, to scroll, to move on. But the forest remembers slowly, in roots, in spores, in silence. Perhaps that's why we're drawn to it, even now. Despite the heat, the bugs, the wildness, we feel something there, a tug, a melancholy familiarity, as if something inside us still knows the language, still aches to be spoken. And if we are very quiet, if we stop measuring, stop naming, stop rushing, we might remember what we are made of. Every visitor to an Amazonian village arrives with invisible luggage. Even if their backpack is light heaven, if they carry no camera, no drone, no guidebook, they bring something heavier. Expectation, history, guilt. Some don't know they carry it. They smile, they nod, they accept the gourd of chicha with forced ease. They try to disappear into the rhythm of village life, hoping to observe without disturbing. But that's impossible. The moment you arrive, things shift. Children stare longer. Dogs bark louder. Even the forest feels like it's holding its breath. You are being watched, not with suspicion necessarily, but with an old, quiet calculation. What will this one take? Because history has taught them that visitors always take something. Sometimes it's information, a photograph, a story. Sometimes it's a sample of soil or a plant rumored to cure what Western medicine cannot. And sometimes it's just a feeling. That low-grade ache of being witnessed without being known. The anthropologists call it the observer effect. But here, it's more personal. The village is not a specimen. It is a family. You do not study someone's kitchen while they're grieving. You do not document someone's rituals as if they are exhibits. And yet people do. All the time. They mean well. Most of them. They come hoping to understand, to help, to witness. But the act of observing changes the observed. The child who would have played now performs. The elder who might have sung now explains. Even silence becomes curated. Some tribes have developed protocols. They know how to host researchers, journalists, aid workers. They know the questions, the nods, the exchange rates. Hospitality becomes defense. And still something slips through. A moment at dusk, when a woman rests her hand on your shoulder without speaking. A boy who draws a map in the dirt, not for you to follow, but just because he wants to. A smell that makes you weep, though you don't know why. These are the real stories, the ones not found in field notes or broadcasts, the ones that make the guilt harder to bear, because eventually you will leave. You will board your canoe, or your small plane, or your chartered jeep. You will return to your world of deadlines and earbuds and streaming cues. And they will remain. They will roast plantains, sing to their babies, argue about who forgot to tie the goats. And they will remember you not as a threat, not even as a friend, but as something that passed through, like a wind, like a storm, like a jaguar that didn't bite, but stared too long. Some visitors come back, most don't. The forest forgets your name quickly, but the people you'll stay with them longer than you know. In almost every Amazonian village, there is a drink that tells you who you are. It's called chicha, fermented, sour, sometimes fizzy, sometimes still. Made from manioc or maize, chewed and spat and left to sit in wide clay bowls, covered by cloth and thyme. The saliva starts, the fermentation it breaks down the starches. The process is personal, intimate. A transformation powered by human breath. To drink it is to share more than a meal. It is to accept the logic of the place. Chicha is served to visitors as a test of humility. Not everyone knows that. Some Westerners smile politely and fake a sip. Others refuse outright. They don't mean to offend, but they do. Because the drink is not about taste. It's about trust. To drink chicha is to say, I do not flinch from your world. I do not require it to become mine before I accept it. You take the bowl in both hands. You drink. You do not wipe your mouth. And then something opens. A woman smiles wider. A child brings you a frog to name. An old man who'd ignored you for days suddenly calls you over to show you a scar from a monkey bite and tells you a story about a ghost he once married. This is the beginning of staying. Staying doesn't mean planting a flag. It doesn't mean building a school, or making a documentary, or writing a book. It means becoming still enough to be unremarkable. It takes weeks, sometimes months, but slowly the performance ends. The village stops reacting to your presence. Your novelty wears off. No one offers you a stool anymore. You sit on the floor like everyone else. You fetch your own water. You stop asking questions and start listening to the way silence bends in the heat. And then you're in. Not inside, not one of them, not ever, but with, tangential. Accepted in the same way they accept thunder or leafcutter ants or distant songs. Present, not a problem, not a spectacle. People start telling you things they wouldn't tell your camera. How one man sees his dead brother in the shape of a bird's flight. How a woman once fell in love with a rubber worker and still dreams in Portuguese. How the children are scared not of spirits, but of the world outside, where they've heard kids are lonely and the trees don't sing. And these confessions, they don't come all at once. They arrive like rain, quiet, in intervals, often when you're not trying to hear anything at all. One afternoon, a girl sits beside you and says, "Do you miss your mother?" You nod, though you hadn't been thinking about her. But now, you are. Now, she's everywhere, in the smoke, in the fabric of your shirt, in the ache behind your eyes. The girl nods too. She doesn't ask for more. She just hands you a small fruit and walks away. That's how grief lives here. Not in therapy sessions or journal entries, but in gestures, in shared silences, in fruit passed between hands without ceremony. Later, someone will joke about you, how you drink chicha like a turtle, how you can't catch fish without falling in. You will laugh too. Not because the joke is kind, but because it is inclusive. They only tease the ones they've decided to keep. And in that moment, for just a second, you won't be a visitor. You'll just be another strange soul drinking the forest. That's the secret. The real Amazon is not a place you go to see. It's a place that either includes you or doesn't. A place that teaches, not through facts, but through weather, through wounds, through fermentation. And if you're lucky, if you stay long enough to become quiet, humble, soft at the edges, you will carry it with you forever. Not in words, but in the rhythm of your breath, the way you hold a bowl, the way you no longer look at the jungle like a painting, but like a face. There are moments in the jungle when the hairs on your arms rise, but you don't know why. The air is still. The leaves do not move. No danger announces itself, and yet something is looking. You don't see it, not exactly. You feel it. This isn't paranoia, it's presence. The Amazon is not an empty backdrop. It is an observer. And once you've stayed long enough past the novelty, past the camera lens, past the anxious itch of needing to understand, you begin to feel its gaze. Not malicious, not benevolent, simply aware. To many tribal communities, this awareness is obvious. The forest is alive, not metaphorically, but literally. It has moods, memories, wounds. Some trees are believed to be wise. Others are spiteful. Certain vines whisper warnings if plucked too harshly. You laugh, at first, internally, politely. You are a product of science and structure, of biology, textbooks, and skeptical podcasts. But then, things start to happen. A path you walked before suddenly feels unfamiliar. A place that once seemed safe now feels wrong, heavy, like breath withheld. A river that ran high yesterday is now bone dry, and no one else seems surprised. You begin to realize they were never joking. A young man once explained it like this: the forest doesn't like to be looked at too hard. It will look back, and sometimes it will move so you don't find what you're looking for. He said it with no irony, no drama, just fact. And it makes a strange kind of sense. In the Western world, we look at nature like a puzzle. Something to solve, to name, to photograph from above. We count species, measure rainfall, build models. But here, knowledge is relational. You don't own information. You inherit it, and only if you're trusted. You're told where not to walk, not because it's dangerous, but because that patch of forest still holds grief. Someone died there years ago, and the plants haven't forgotten. You're told not to speak a certain name aloud, because it calls something. You're told to avoid a specific tree at dusk, because it leans too far into other worlds. This isn't about superstition. It's about etiquette. It's about the understanding that not all knowing is yours. And slowly, something in you shifts. You stop narrating your experience. You stop asking the forest to reveal itself. You move more quietly. You wait more often. You let the silence stretch longer than you're used to. And the forest begins to speak, not in sentences, but in sensation. The rustle that sounds like a whisper, the insect drone that rises suddenly when you lie down to sleep, the way a spider moves across your foot like punctuation. It's not the words that change you, it's the listening. You realize you've spent your life performing, attention-taking notes, highlighting, recording. But this is surrender. You do not study the forest. You allow it to study you. And in that surrender, something ancient softens. Something restless inside, some internal auditor, finally quiets. Because you are no longer the watcher. You are being watched. And somehow it feels okay. It feels right. Every village has its ghosts. Not the cinematic kind. Not the cold spot, flickering lights, make you scream type. These are quieter, hungrier. They live not in houses, but in memory, in repetition, in the unspoken. Among many Amazonian tribes, the line between the living and the dead is not a firm wall. It is a mist, and sometimes it lifts. A man might speak to his dead wife while mending a net, not because he believes she is haunting him, but because she is present, still there in the way the knots hold, still there in the rhythm of the river. Children are taught early that the forest holds the souls of those who passed, but also the laughter, the jokes, the fights that never finished. These remnants curl around branches, slip into wind, shimmer in puddles after rain. One elder, when asked what happens after death, shrugged. They sit with us. You just don't hear them if you talk too much. There is something deeply practical about this spirituality. Ghosts are not terrifying, they are inconvenient. They knock over bowls. They cause fevers. They appear in dreams and make you forget where you left your sandals. But sometimes they guide. A hunter might be led by a dream to a good patch of game. A woman may wake with the image of a flower in her mind and discover it cures her child's fever. When asked how she knew, she simply says it was a gift. And in this world, gifts from the dead are not macabre. They are sacred. But they also carry rules. You must name the dead carefully. Not all spirits want to be remembered. Some names are whispered only at night. Some are avoided entirely, buried under nicknames and metaphors. A man who drowned might be called the one who walked too deep. A woman who died in childbirth becomes the song that turned around. It's not erasure, it's reverence. Because remembering too loudly can summon. Some anthropologists struggle with this. They want clear answers, lineages, names, timelines. But the villagers do not care for clarity, they care for balance. If the dead are too present, the living suffer. If the dead are ignored, the forest forgets them. And so, rituals, small fires lit at thresholds, leaves burned while names are sung, necklaces buried beneath new homes, children taught to laugh a little louder after nightfall, so the ghosts don't get lonely. It is not a culture obsessed with death. It is a culture that refuses to pretend it isn't here. In the West, we sanitize, we embalm, we speak in euphemism, passed on at peace. No longer with us. Here death is with you, eating with you, humming behind your back as you wash your face in the river. And somehow it's comforting. Because if the dead are still close, then so is love. Then grief is not a door slammed shut, but a curtain stirred by wind. Then maybe you're never truly alone. There's a phrase among the Motsas people, a group that straddles the Peru-Brazil border, that translates if you stretch the words like cloth to, the thoughts that cannot be traded. They use it when speaking of emotions, of spirits, of sensations that language simply cannot carry. Not to say those things are ineffable, but that to name them too precisely would be to dishonor their shape. This is something the Western mind struggles with. We are trained to define, categorize, explain. If we cannot label it, we question if it's real. But the forest is full of things that defy translation, not because they are magic, but because they are intimate. How do you translate the feeling of stepping into a stream at dusk and recognizing a scent you've never smelled before, but which makes you cry anyway? Or the eerie sense that a tree is staring at you, metaphorically, but truly you feel ashamed for not saying hello? Or the way an elder listens to the silence between two people speaking and then interrupts not with words, but with a cough, as if to say, "You've said enough, the forest is answering now." These are not cultural quirks. They are modes of knowing, ways of being that don't fit neatly into verbs or nouns. And for those who visit and stay too briefly. Anthropologists on a deadline, documentarians with limited battery life. There's a danger. The danger of thinking you get it. You do not get it. The forest does not explain itself in a weekend. There are words in these languages for emotions we've never named. Words for the way jealousy tastes in the mouth. For the ache of a child who dreams in a tongue her mother no longer speaks. For the hunger that isn't in the belly, but in the chest. When you want to go home, but the jungle is your home, and still it hurts. There is a word one tribe uses for the smile someone gives you when they know they will never see you again, but they're pretending not to know. That word alone could fill an entire book, but we don't have it. So instead, we say things like farewell or take care, and we leave. We go back to cities, to inboxes, to playlists designed to drown the quiet. And we carry these forest truths like pebbles in our pockets, unsure what to do with them, unsure who will understand. And here's the hardest part. We may never understand. Not fully, because some things cannot be translated. They can only be witnessed, and even then knowingly, if you're willing to let go of understanding as the goal. The Amazon is not there to be understood. It is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a presence to be met. And in meeting it, you do not come away with answers. You come away with new silences. Silences that hum, that ache, that stay. When most people think of the Amazon, they picture wildness. A place untouched, untamed, a green void, without cities, without roads, without history. But that's not true. Beneath the canopy, under the moss and vines and roots thick as wrists, lie the remnants of civilizations. Yes, civilizations. In recent years, with the help of LiDAR laser scanning technology that sees through the foliage, archaeologists have begun to uncover vast urban networks, grids of roads, canals, plaza complexes, geometric earthworks, all carefully engineered, mapped with astronomical precision. There were cities here, real ones, not just huts in a clearing, but societies with social structure, spiritual systems, trade, art. Think of it, a city of 100,000 people, tucked under the leaves of what we assumed was empty jungle. It was never empty. We just weren't looking correctly. These pre-Columbian cultures shaped the forest more than we understood. They cultivated it, not in the sense of conquering it, but in symbiosis. They planted orchards, managed game populations, moved rivers with care. They created a living infrastructure. One archaeologist called it garden cities, not built over nature, but with it. This challenges our most beloved myths. We love the idea that the Amazon is pure wilderness, that tribes live, as they always have, suspended in some eternal past, that our knowledge is the peak and theirs, the primitive baseline. But the forest tells a different story, one of collapse, because these cities didn't vanish because they were inferior. They vanished because contact came, disease, slavery, fire. The European conquest didn't just kill people, it erased memory. What remained what we see today as isolated tribes, the descendants of survivors. Imagine that. Imagine your city falling in days, your people dying in weeks, and generations later, your descendants being studied as if they've always been simple, because the complexity was burned, and only your bare survival remained. This is what we forget, that isolation is not a sign of primitivism. It is often the scar of trauma. And yet, there's resilience. The forest did not swallow these cities as punishment. It held them gently. It wrapped them in green, hid them from view, like a mother protecting a secret until her children are ready to hear it. And now we are beginning to listen, not to conquer, not to reclaim, but perhaps to apologize, to admit we were wrong, that the jungle was never blank, that these people are not living fossils, but descendants of architects, astronomers, philosophers who traded, dreamed, and danced under stars that still shine. It changes everything. The next time you see a clearing in the forest and call it primitive pause, it might be a plaza, it might be a graveyard, it might be the only surviving trace of a world wiser than the one we built in its place. Cities usually shout. Their sounds are hard, honks, drills, sirens, heels on concrete. Civilization, in the Western sense, is loud, assertive, audible from miles away. But in the Amazon, the remnants of cities murmur. They do not announce themselves. They whisper through the soil. A line of mounds in a perfect circular amphitheater for spirits. A sudden grove of fruit trees, spaced just so once. A food forest, now a mirage of intentional design. A layer of dark, rich soil terra, preta they call it. Black earth, filled with charcoal and broken pottery, impossibly fertile in a land where most dirt is poor. This isn't happenstance. It is archaeology disguised as ecology, memory in root systems, architecture made of nutrients. These traces suggest something profound, that the people of the Amazon didn't just live in the forest, they engineered it, not by clearing it, but by shaping its growth, encouraging it, loving it. They did what we, for all our brilliance, have forgotten how to do. They built systems that nourished their environment, rather than extracted from it. That's hard for us to grasp. We assume civilization must dominate, that development must leave scars, that success is measured in metal, glass, and grid. But imagine a civilization so advanced it left almost no trace. Not because it was primitive, but because it was deliberate. What if the highest form of technology is integration? What if progress means leaving things better than you found them, man being forgotten in the process? There is a humility in that, a letting go of ego, of authorship. Western empires build for legacy. We carve our names into stone. We erect monuments. We brand, we copyright, we preserve. But here, in the ruins, the jungle holds like lullabies. Legacy is composted. It becomes life again. A child climbs a tree planted by someone whose name no longer exists. A bird nests in a wall that once framed a star ceremony. A fish breeds in a canal that echoes the shape of constellations. It's easy to miss. You could walk over a 1,000-year-old road and never know. And maybe that's the point. In these whispers, there is a message not just about the past, but about what kind of future is still possible. Not louder, not faster, just kinder. Imagine if we stopped measuring greatness by what we built and started, measuring it by what we left unharmed. Imagine if the earth remembered us not as a wound, but as a song. Empires, when they die, tend to leave monuments, crumbled pillars, broken aqueducts, walls weathered by centuries and yet still tall enough to remind you something powerful happened here. But the forest is not a monument. It is not concerned with impressing you. Its ruins do not demand your reverence. They do not align neatly with your camera lens. They dissolve into soil, whisper into vines, become indistinguishable from the very life they once organized. This, perhaps, is the greatest affront to empire, because empire is about permanence, about scale, about the long arm of control. But the forest teaches a different kind of grandeur, one that flows instead of stands, one that grows quietly, dies quietly, and returns without applause. It's tempting to view this as fragility, but what if it's strength? There is a tree in the western Amazon, its roots wide. its trunk hollowed by age that once grew in the courtyard of a long-forgotten ceremonial site. The archaeologists measured its rings, tested the soil. They confirmed, yes, people lived here. Yes, they gathered here. But when asked what had become of the civilization that built it, the elder who guided them shrugged. It became the forest. That was not a metaphor. To him, the vines weren't invaders. They were heirs. The songs that had once echoed off clay walls now rose with insects. The knowledge that had once passed between priest and initiate now lived in the behavior of birds, in the use of certain mushrooms, in the way a path curves around a hill without ever being paved. And so when outsiders come, when they say, "We've discovered a lost city," the people who live there now only smile, because nothing was lost. It simply changed shape. That is the forest's answer to empire. Not resistance, not revolution, absorption. You may come with maps and drones and science, but the forest remains intact. It gives you only what it wants to give. It teaches only when it's ready. And if you try to take too much, it swallows your findings in moss and moisture and time. In this way, the Amazon has outlasted every attempt to conquer it. The rubber lords of the missionaries, the agribusiness cartels, the cameras, the census takers, it sees them all. And still, it breathes. What does that say about us? We build kingdoms to defy death. They built villages to live with it. And when the end came, as it always does, they didn't leave a tomb. They left trees. They left soil that feeds itself. They left languages you can only speak if you first learned how to listen. And maybe, just maybe, they left a question buried beneath the roots. What kind of world do you want to be forgotten by? There is something oddly disorienting the first time you wake up in a shabono, the great circular communal dwelling used by many Amazonian tribes. There are no walls, no doors, no windows framing the morning. You wake not to a beeping alarm or the sudden flood of light through blinds, but to the murmur of bodies, the rustle of feet near a fire, a baby's whimper, laughter that leaks like smoke into your ears, the warmth of someone walking past you, the cool breath of the forest drifting in. You wake with the world, not apart from it. It is both comforting and terrifying. In the city, your room is a kingdom. Your walls, your armor. The window, a controlled aperture through which you allow the world in on your terms. But in the shabono, you are porous. You cannot pretend you are alone. Someone sees you, hears you, smells your dreams. The idea of privacy dissolves, and with it, something else. The illusion that you are separate. It's not just architecture, it's philosophy. The very structure of life here says, we are together, not romantically, not always peacefully, but undeniably. In a shabono, you hear the fights, you hear the sobs, you hear the sudden, contagious laughter of someone remembering something from a long time ago. You can't pretend others aren't in pain. You can't pretend they don't exist. And so, in time, you begin to adjust. You speak softer. You move more carefully. You begin to sense moods the way you once sensed weather. The teenager sulking in the northeast corner. The man sharpening his arrows with just a little more force than usual. The woman whose silences today feel heavier than yesterday. And you start to learn something that no school teaches. Empathy by proximity. Not the kind that comes from being told to care, but the kind that grows naturally when other people are no longer background noise. You notice, and in noticing, you change. In the city, we design for solitude, for control, for retreat. We prize our square footage, our soundproof walls, our curated playlists to block out the world. But what if that's why we feel so alone? Not because no one is near, but because we've built our lives to keep them out. The shabono is imperfect. It offers no silence, no escape, no place to hide your bad moods. But it offers something else, the comfort of being known, even in your worst moments. No need to explain why you wept into your hands at noon. They saw, they know. Tomorrow you'll laugh again, someone else will fall apart, and life will go on in the round. That is the gift of a world without windows. No borders between your heart and the weather. Just breath, just presence, just the soft hum of others, reminding you you're not alone here. It's hard to describe the moment you realize that everything you were taught to value has no currency here. Not your job title, not your GPA, not your wardrobe, your tech, your clever turns of phrase. You arrive with all your invisible armor and it means nothing. The forest doesn't care. The villagers don't either. They do not ask what you do. They do not measure your worth in productivity or potential or prestige. Instead, they watch, not suspiciously, just attentively. How do you listen? How do you move through space? How do you respond to the child who places a half-dead insect in your lap? And slowly, the economy you were raised in begins to melt. There is no money here, no price tags, no negotiation over worth. That does not mean there is no trade. Far from it, there are exchanges, but they are layered with meaning. When a woman offers you roasted plantain, she's not feeding you, she's extending a thread of trust. When a man helps you up after you trip on a root, he's not being polite. He's placing you, gently, within the social web. Reciprocity is everything. If someone helps you, you help back. Not always immediately, not always in the same way, but the balance is felt, like humidity, like a rhythm underneath every day. Gifts are given, not measured. A gourd of fermented drink left beside your hammock at dawn. A song hummed while braiding fibers for a bag. A story told not for your benefit, but because it needed telling, and you happened to be there. This is not charity. It is not performance. It is simply life, unpriced. And you begin to realize how much of your own world has been monetized. The way friendship is structured around events that cost. The way rest must be justified. The way love can be obscured by the fear of giving too much. But here, everything is already given. Food is shared until it's gone. Time is offered without clock or cost. Even the land, this vast breathing cathedral of green ease, not owned, it is inhabited, stewarded, loved. There are fights, yes, jealousies, grudges. No one here pretends perfection, but they fight within a system that does not commodify existence. When the government comes and asks for deeds, maps, ownership titles, the villagers laugh. How can I own the river that taught my son to swim? How can I sell the hill where my wife saw the jaguar in her dream? It is not resistance. It is bewilderment. Because once, not so long ago, the world was not for sale. And perhaps, in some corners of the forest, it still isn't. Perhaps there, you are not a brand, or a worker, or a demographic. You are just a body with breath, a story unfolding. You give, you receive, and that is enough. It started as a sound low, foreign, to steady to be thunder. Children stopped playing. Dogs pricked their ears. The old men did not move, but their faces tightened, just slightly, like leather bending in heat. Then the leaves trembled. The wind changed, and above the canopy, something unnatural split the sky. A helicopter. This was not the first. Over the past decade, More and more machines had appeared above the trees, surveying, photographing, announcing their presence with a kind of mechanical indifference. But that day, the helicopter landed. Dust spun up from the clearing, blinding for a moment. The rotor's wind scattered ashes from a fire, blew a woman's long hair across her eyes, and then figures, men in uniforms, smiles fixed like decals. They came with gifts, always gifts, flashlights, antibiotics, notebooks, batteries, packaged rice. They spoke in the measured tone of someone who expects to be understood. Their translator, sweating in a tight shirt, looked less certain. The villagers gathered, not out of fear, not out of welcome, but because presence demands response. The leader of the village stood with his hands behind his back, watching. He'd seen it before. The slow approach of outside interest. First a journalist, then a missionary, then a drone that hovered so long above the children they began throwing rocks at it, laughing. Now, this, the men explained. They were here on behalf of something larger, a conservation project, a sustainable development plan, a partnership. They used words like infrastructure, integration, data collection. The villagers nodded. They understood enough to know what was not being said. And then came the map, unfolded like a magic trick, bright, crisp, full of colored zones. Green for preservation, red for industry, blue for buffer zones. The village, circled in yellow, sat at the edge of something marked extraction corridor. No one flinched. Not yet, but someone coughed. A child asked, too loudly, if the paper could be used for starting fires. A woman nudged him, half laughing. The leader said nothing. He studied the map as if it were a lie written in a language he once knew. He asked one question: where are the spirits marked? The translator hesitated. There's no section for that. Then the map is wrong. That was all. Polite smiles faltered. One of the uniformed men muttered something to another. The translator scratched his neck. The air grew heavier, despite the wind still blowing from the chopper's blades. Eventually, the men handed over their gifts, the rice, the flashlights. They smiled again, stiffer now. The helicopter lifted, and the forest closed around the clearing once more. That night, the villagers held a ceremony, not of protest, of protection. Ash was smeared on cheeks. Old songs were sung. Children sat still, listening not just with ears, but with breath. The spirits were asked to stay awake, not because the people were afraid, but because they were preparing for whatever would come next. The jungle remembers these moments. The wind still carries the pitch of that rotor. The soil still holds the weight of the men's boots. But the villagers, they remain, watching, listening, living in the gap between welcome and warning. The first time the village received paperwork, they thought it was a letter. The envelope arrived weeks late, passed from outpost to outpost, until finally it landed in the hands of a schoolteacher who had once studied in the city. It smelled of glue and dust and something sharper and urgency that didn't belong to the forest. Inside was a contract, pages of it, typed, stamped, numbered. It came from a government agency with a long name and a short memory. A proposal, it said. A request for cooperation. A blueprint for inclusion. The words were legal, formal, dense as clay. At first the villagers didn't understand. The schoolteacher read it aloud slowly. Then again, some asked what was being promised. Others asked what was being taken. No one asked why. The why was already known. Progress, efficiency, unity. The contract offered recognition. It offered paved roads and mobile clinics and a chance to vote in elections. It spoke of integration, but only as a one-way current. It did not ask what the forest might want. It did not mention what would happen to the trees. It mentioned compensation. A fund would be created. A percentage of future resource use would be returned to the community. There would be training, supervision, oversight. In exchange, a permit to drill. Not here, not directly, the contract assured, but close enough that the ground might tremble. Close enough that the river might wake up different. The village council gathered under the moonlight. The fire flickered low. Faces shone with sweat and indecision. Children slept nearby, limbs thrown over each other in unconscious trust. The leader held the papers, folded now, softening at the edges. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't quote philosophy. He said only this: who will explain to the anacondas where the borders are? No one answered, not because they didn't understand, but because they did. How do you explain a contract to a forest that doesn't recognize time? To a sky that doesn't know what a fiscal quarter is? To a community where value is measured not in output, but in presence? There is no place for those questions on the dotted line. And so the papers sat, for days, then weeks, slowly curling in the humidity, like leaves pretending to be law. Eventually, they were placed in a gourd and buried under the roots of a tree that had once cured a fever. No response was sent. Silence, they decided, was their answer. Let them hear what they could from that. In cities, silence is a failure of communication. Here, it is the highest form of resistance. There is a law in the city that says, you must prove you live somewhere before you can protect it. It sounds logical, rational, bureaucratically sound. But in the rainforest, proof is not on paper. It is under fingernails, in the way someone walks a trail blindfolded. In the taste of a fruit you only pick when the moon is right. In a song sung for the first time in years, just because a bird's call reminded you. These are not documents, but they are the deepest form of belonging. Still, the officials came. Clipboards, badges, ballpoint pens that leaked in the heat. They were kind, mostly. Some had good intentions. Others had deadlines. All carried the invisible weight of institutions' big words. Stiff posture, the assumption that knowing how to use a spreadsheet made your presence more legitimate. They asked questions like, how many households reside in this area? What is the monthly income per family? Is there a formal leadership structure recognized by the state? They asked these questions without irony, as if families who live in longhouses with no doors should calculate income, or as if leadership could be translated into title and tax code. The villagers answered with patience, at first. How many households? Well, we all live together. Monthly income? We don't have a month. Formal leadership? There's the one who knows the stars, the one who knows the plants, and the one who knows how to calm a crying child. Which one do you mean? These were not the answers they wanted. They nodded politely, wrote down other things. They asked if there were boundaries, fences, signs, coordinates. A girl laughed and pointed to a butterfly. That's the border, she said. When it crosses, we follow. They did not write that down, because it didn't fit the form. In the weeks that followed, a few tried harder. One man, a lawyer, with soft eyes, stayed longer than the rest. He watched, he listened, he stopped using his phone. He learned a few words in the local tongue. One night, by the fire, he asked the leader, what would your law look like? The answer came slowly. Our law would not be written. It would be remembered. He nodded. And what happens if someone breaks it? They must sit with the one they hurt until the harm is seen. The lawyer didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally returned to the city, he didn't bring back a contract. He brought back a recording. Just the sound of that fire. The voices of people speaking a language no office would recognize. He played it for no one. But sometimes, in his apartment, alone, he played it for himself. Because it reminded him, some laws are made to bind people. Others are made to remind them they are already bound. Every few years, a new map is drawn, not by the villagers, but by those who visit them. These maps are clean, digitized, colored in pastel codes, green for conservation, brown for agriculture, red for risk. They are filed, circulated, used in grant proposals and development briefings, and yet they fail. Not always materially. Roads are built, rivers rerouted, satellites nod approvingly from above, but spiritually, emotionally, they fall apart, because the forest does not follow these borders, and neither do the spirits. Among many indigenous peoples of the Amazon, the land is not divided, it is animated. The hill where the jaguar once cried is sacred. The curve of the river where the fish sleep off limits during moonless nights. A small grove of trees, shaped like a broken circle, is said to be the imprint of a woman who once turned into wind. You do not walk there casually. You do not build a clinic there, even if the data says it's strategically optimal. But the maps do not record these stories. There is no symbol for the tree that dreams of its fallen brother. No dotted line round the pool where the moon once bathed. So the projects come and fail. They put solar panels on houses that don't need electricity. They build schools in places where knowledge is passed by mouth, not blackboard. They offer internet service to people who still sing their messages into rivers. When the projects fail, the officials blame logistics. But the villagers just shake their heads. They built on a silence, one woman said, and the silence didn't agree. The forest is not being metaphorical. It has rules. But the rules are not written. They are inherited intuitively, like how to hum a baby to sleep in a language you've never spoken. And when you break these rules, the land resists. The fruit stops appearing. The trails become confused. A fever spreads, inexplicably, only in the new buildings. Coincidence? Maybe. But the villagers don't think so. To them, the map is wrong because it is flat. It sees only from above, not within. It speaks of acres, not ancestors. It calculates yield, not yearning. Once, a geographer visited and tried to teach the children to draw maps of their village. He gave them paper, pencils, a model. One child drew a line in the shape of a snake, wrapped in leaves. "This is the school," she said. The geographer frowned. "But where are the walls?" The child shrugged. "There are none, only the place where the stories gather." He didn't include her drawing in his report, but maybe he should have, because that is the map the spirits follow, the one drawn in memory, in dreams, in the pulse of the land, the one that can't be filed but can be felt. In the early morning, before the sun pierces the mist, you can hear them. Songs not sung in chorus, not staged, just released, like steam, like breath meeting dawn. One woman sings while grinding maize, her voice low, almost muttered. A lullaby, maybe, or a lament. The line between the two is often thin here. A boy whistles something tuneless that his father insists is an old hunting chant passed down without words. In the trees, birds call back not in mimicry, but in companionship, as if they, too, remember the tune. These songs aren't written down. There's no notation, no YouTube playlist to preserve them. and yet they persist. For generations, these melodies have moved through bodies like water through soil. They shift with time. A line is forgotten, replaced. A rhythm altered to suit a new dance. No one minds. That's the point. Because here, song is not a product. It is a relationship, a way of speaking to the unseen, to the spirits in the trees, to the memories in the bones, to the fish in the river who only rise when the right tune calls them. There are songs for birth, for death, for storms, for planting, for joking with the moon, for asking a jaguar to stay on the other side of the trail, please. Some are loud, most are not. Some are only sung by the old. Others, especially the mischievous ones, are preserved best by children. And still, they outlast technology. One year, a foreign NGO brought tablets into the village. Educational games, music apps, translation tools. For a while, the children were fascinated. They mimicked city accents, laughed at animations, memorized pop tunes in languages they did not speak. Then one day, a tablet broke. Then another. The solar charger failed. The battery rusted in the damp. Within a month, the forest reclaimed the technology, but the songs, still there, still hummed in hammocks, still whistled into bark cups, still drifting through smoke at night. You begin to understand, this is not nostalgia, it is survival. In a world where almost everything has a timestamp, expiration dates, limited warranties, digital decay, these songs endure because they do not seek permanence. They are not fixed. They are carried, not stored in clouds, but in bodies, not downloaded, but inherited. There is no subscription fee, no update required. You learn them by being present, by listening longer than is comfortable, by not asking too many questions. Eventually, someone will teach you a line. They will not tell you what it means. You must learn that by singing it. And in the singing, you join a lineage, not of fame, not of ownership, but of presence. Long after the satellites have failed, after the maps have faded, and the roads have cracked, and the drones have stopped their watching, these songs will remain, not because they were recorded, but because someone will still remember how they made her feel. There is a smell that lives at the edge of every Amazonian village. Not rot, not perfume, something older, warmer, a mix of smoke, sweat, damp wood, and the faint sweetness of things just about to spoil. It seeps into everything, clothes, hair, skin, memory. You carry it without noticing, and then one day you catch it on a bus, in a laundromat, in a crowded subway car, in some faraway city, and just like that, you are back, back under the thatched roof, back in the dusk light, back with the fire that never quite dies, even when no one is feeding it. Because in these villages, the fire is not just heat, it is heart. It is where food is prepared, stories are told, sleep begins, and old wounds are massaged into meaning. The smoke is not ornamental, it is medicinal. It drives off mosquitoes, it preserves meat, it slows the inevitable decay of wood and cloth and memory. When someone dies, the smoke changes, it thickens, lowers, it clings to the hair of the mourners, coats the walls, marks the occasion in a way words never could. It becomes a veil between what was and what remains. Visitors often cough at first. They wave their hands, try to find fresh air, but there is no escape. The air is honest, saturated with living. Eventually, you stop resisting. You let the smoke find its place in you, and then, like everyone else, you start to remember things differently, not by calendar, not by photograph, but by scent. The way someone's laugh sounded in smoke. The way silence settled when the fire popped just once. The way grief tastes when it's not spoken aloud. In the West, we use candles to remember. We light them for the dead, for intentions, for ambience. Here, the fire never goes out, because remembering isn't occasional, it is ambient. There are no cemeteries. The dead are near, beneath the floor, in the trees, in the smoke. You cannot avoid them. And why would you want to? One night, you wake up coughing. The fire has been stirred. A shape moves near it. For a moment, you don't know if it's a person or a memory, but no one seems alarmed. So you lie back down. The smoke curls into your hair, your throat, your thoughts. It says nothing, but you feel it. That someone is being remembered, and perhaps so are you. In Western education, learning is something you do. You go to school, you memorize, you test, you graduate. You perform your knowledge like a badge. See, I've been told what to think, and I can repeat it. But in the forest, learning is less an event and more a side effect. You learn because you are paying attention. You learn because the alternative is hunger, embarrassment, or danger. You learn because someone let you watch long enough that you began to understand without being told. There are no chalkboards, no quizzes, no inspirational posters. A boy learns to climb by falling. A girl learns to weave by ruining her first basket. A child learns where to bathe, where not to, by the bite marks of river spirit sore, just from hearing stories about them whispered over fire. Adults rarely correct. They do not hover. They allow risk. To an outsider, this looks like neglect. To the child is trust. And so, knowledge is inherited through rhythm, not recitation. A woman hums while preparing medicine. She does not explain the plant, but the child beside her absorbs it, the shape, the feel, the smell, the mood she's in while using it. Years later, that child will recognize the plant in a dream. That is the lesson. Not content, not accuracy, but relationship. Knowledge is not a commodity. It is a thread, and it's yours only if you carry it well. This is perhaps why so much of the forest's intelligence is invisible to those who visit briefly. They look for explanations, instructions, charts, but they miss the way a glance between two elders says more than a textbook. They miss the way the birds shift when a snake is near. They miss the moment a child breaks a rule, then pauses not because he's afraid of punishment, but because he's remembering how his grandmother would sigh, and he doesn't want her to do that again. This is not sentiment, it's pedagogy. Real learning leaves no certificate. It shows up in the way you hold your hands when offering food, in the way you wait an extra breath before interrupting, in the way you answer a question with a story, not a fact. Because facts expire, stories don't. The most educated people in the village often appear silent, disinterested, even sleepy. Then someone mentions a fish, or a storm, or a boy who dreams too much. Suddenly they speak, not to impress, not to instruct, but because the moment is right. And the child listening, she's not being taught, she's being trusted. In many Amazonian communities, your name is not fixed. It shifts, it stretches, it sometimes disappears altogether. You might be called one thing as a child, another as an adult. Your name might come from a joke, a dream, a mistake. It might be given by your grandmother, or by a bird who wouldn't stop calling near your hammock the morning you were born. And when you die, your name might be buried with you. In some tribes, the name of the dead is never spoken again. Not out of fear, but reverence. To say it would be to keep calling them back, confusing their spirit, trapping them between breaths. So instead, they are remembered in gestures, in silences, in the shape of how people pause when speaking of the one who used to laugh during storms. Your name, then, is not your property. It is a gift. And like all gifts here, it must be handled with care. This can be hard for outsiders to grasp. We are used to names being permanent, printed on documents, chiseled in stone, enshrined in email signatures and monogrammed towels. But in the forest, identity is porous. You are not who you say you are. You are how you're remembered, how you move through space, how you sit with others in stillness. One boy was once given 3 names before his first tooth. One for his habit of hiding behind tree roots, one for the smell of the fruit his mother craved while carrying him, and one that came in a dream his uncle saw a fox and a fire walking together. All 3 names lived in him. None were official. They simply fit. Later, he would be called something else entirely, after he brought a snake into the shabono, thinking it was lost. He wasn't punished. He was renamed. That name stayed. Because here, names are less labels than stories. They are verbs pretending to be nouns. To be named is to be located in someone's memory, and to name another is to carry a small piece of them inside you. So when an outsider insists on writing things down family trees, census logs, legal documents, they're often met with gentle resistance, not because the villagers refuse to cooperate, but because what's being asked doesn't make sense. How many siblings do you have? Well, now or before? What is your full name? Which one? It's not evasive, it's accurate, because identity here is not a pin on a map. It's a path through the forest, sometimes visible, often not. A trail of echoes, left in song, in touch, in the way someone sighs your name long after you've gone. And when no one says your name again, you are not lost, you've just been released. In the cities, dreams are private things. They happen behind closed eyelids, often dismissed by breakfast. They are interpreted, analyzed, sometimes shared, but rarely believed. In the Amazon, dreams are different. They walk with you. They're not dismissed upon waking. They're not symbolic riddles to be solved. They are guidance, visitation, premonition. They are how the spirits speak when the body is too loud to listen. If a woman dreams of a snake biting her hand, she may refuse to fish that day. If a man dreams of a lost relative calling his name, he might light a fire and sing until the air settles. No one mocks this. No one doubts it. Dreams here are treated with the same seriousness as rainfall or illness. They are part of the weather of the mind, predictable but real. Children are taught early to remember them. Each morning, before the first drink of water, they are asked what they saw in the night. Not to be judged, but to be protected. If a child dreams of drowning, the adults may not let him near the river for a few days. If she dreams of a bird speaking in riddles, an elder might offer a small song to help her understand what hasn't yet made itself clear. It's not superstition, it's care, a different kind of science. In these communities, there are dreamers, people who walk between night and day with ease. Not always elders, sometimes children, sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who don't speak much but always seem to know when rain is coming. One such dreamer, an old man with eyes like storm clouds, once said, "We don't dream alone. The forest dreams with us." That line stuck, because it explains something hard to articulate, that here, reality is porous. Time is soft. The boundary between real and imagined is not a wallet, a hammock, swaying in the dark. When outsiders visit, they often underestimate this. They scoff, even gently. They say things like, "It was just a dream," but just has no place here. One researcher once dismissed a boy's dream of fire swallowing the sky. A week later, a helicopter dropped flares nearby during a demonstration flight. The forest burned for 3 days. The boy didn't smile. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just stopped speaking to the researcher, because what had been offered was not believed. And in a place where belief is woven into survival, that is no small wound. So if you're lucky enough to sleep in the forest, be mindful. What visits you in the night is not random. It is the forest reaching out, perhaps not to scare you or teach you, but simply to be seen. And if you wake with a feeling you cannot name, don't rush to dismiss it. Maybe it's just a dream. Or maybe it's the world remembering you back. Rain in the Amazon doesn't always fall. Sometimes it just waits. It hangs in the air like a question you're not ready to answer, heavy, pregnant with sound. You feel it in your jaw, your knees, the hair on your arms. You look at the sky, not to see if it's cloudy, but to see if the clouds have decided. Because here, weather isn't forecasted, it's negotiated. The villagers know the signs, not in numbers, in gestures. The way a certain frog sounds deeper than usual. The way the wind smells different, metallic, impatient. The way the birds leave before they've eaten. And when the rain does fall, it does not ask permission. It arrives, loud, laughing, like a drunk friend who kicks the door open and says, "Did you miss me?" Roofs rattle, fires hiss and sputter. Conversations pause, not out of annoyance but respect, because the rain is not an interruption, it's a guest. And sometimes it's a god. There are stories of rains that fell for 10 days without stopping, rains that took voices, rains that taught lessons, rains that whispered names into sleeping ears. A boy once claimed he learned how to track animals because the rain showed him their paths, not by clearing them, by singing them. He would sit outside, palms up, letting the drops hit in different rhythms, naming each one. "They walk like this," he said, tapping his foot. "The deer, the snake. My grandfather when he's angry." No one laughed, because the rain here is a teacher, not of science, of relationship. You learn how to time your day around it, how to listen for its approach in the way the leaves stop rustling, how to run, not to avoid it, but to meet it where it's weakest. Even the insects respond. Ants build higher, beetles disappear, mosquitoes somehow multiply. And when the rain finally leaves, when the air thins and the fire resumes, its crackling, you feel a kind of silence that cities never know. Not absence, reverence, because the rain didn't come to ruin plans. It came to remind you, you are not in charge. That the world moves on rhythms older than strategy, older than language, older than even the first name ever whispered in the first dark shelter under the first dripping tree. You can bring calendars, data, technology, but the rain will still fall how and when it chooses. And maybe, just maybe, that's a kind of mercy. Because if the world still surprises us, still ignores us, then maybe we haven't broken it completely. Maybe some things are still wild, still sacred, still unwilling to be bought. Beneath the forest floor, beneath the roots that twist like questions, there are bones, not buried in neat rows, not sealed in caskets, but placed with care in ways that confuse the maps. Sometimes they're tucked under trees that bloom strangely well. Sometimes they're wrapped in leaves and ash, near streams where the water thickens during the new moon. And sometimes they're scattered not because they were forgotten, but because they were meant to wander. In many Amazonian cultures, Bones are not remains. They are continuations. They are not what's left of the person. They are what keeps the person close. Some are crushed and mixed with cassava, not out of morbidity, but love. To take in the dead is to say, I carry you, not metaphorically. Literally, it scandalizes outsiders. But to the people here, it's an act of ultimate tenderness. You don't wear black. You don't weep at monuments. You eat, slowly, carefully. You return someone to the cycle they never really left. The earth, after all, doesn't care for boxers. It prefers what can be used again. Ash nourishes the roots. Calcium feeds the soil. The breath you spent grieving becomes mist, becomes rain, becomes the call of a bird that only sings when someone important has just left the world. The villagers know. They say nothing, but their eyes follow that bird until it disappears. Not because it's symbolic, because it's true, and the forest confirms it. Bones aren't always left alone. Sometimes they're moved, picked up, whispered to, washed. One tribe sings over them, another paints them, another only touches them with certain leaves, believing that the oils carry messages no living tongue can say. And when a tree grows particularly strong in a certain place, the children are told that one carries your uncle, not metaphor, not myth, memory. In this way, the dead don't haunt. They hover, they enter jokes, they protect paths, they confuse the dogs. They don't want you to be sad forever, but they do want to be remembered. The villagers oblige, not with anniversaries, but with instinct. A pause before eating, a name whispered into the steam of a drink, a smile that appears uninvited because something just felt like them. And when outsiders come with their questions, carbon dating, hypotheses, they find their science at odds with something gentler, older. One anthropologist once found a child playing with a human jawbone, carefully, reverently. He asked what she was doing. She shrugged. He was curious. I'm helping him see. He never published that moment, but he never forgot it, because in that instant he realized the past isn't buried here. It's braided into breath. Every language has limits. Even the most expansive vocabulary, your favorite poems, your sharpest definitions, reaches a point where it must stop and gesture helplessly toward the horizon. A shrug, a pause, a sigh. But in the Amazon, some tribes have words that live in that space. Words that Western tongues cannot carry. Not because they're too complex, because they name emotions and understandings we've stopped bothering to feel. There's a word used by one riverine community that means something like the ache you feel when a place you love changes without you. Another word, longer and only spoken when sitting on the ground, translates roughly to the silence between two people who still love each other but can no longer speak. They are not poetry. They are practical, used daily. A mother scolds her child gently, not for misbehaving, but for forgetting to greet the wind when it changed direction. She uses a word that implies not just rudeness, but spiritual forgetfulness, a neglect of connection. A man stops mid-sentence when a certain bird calls overhead. He looks down, murmurs a word that means, someone who has died is watching us now. He says it the way you might say it's starting to rain. Normal, specific, necessary. There are no synonyms in English. We have feelings, yes. We have terms for trauma, for grief, for happiness diluted by guilt. But we lack the grammar of reciprocity, of belonging that isn't ownership, of memory that isn't linear. And most of all, we lack the words for what we've forgotten, not just collectively, personally. We have no word for the scent of a shirt worn by someone who loved you before they left. No word for the moment when you realize a place you once lived no longer knows your name. No word for the quiet apology we offer to the earth when we take too much but too late. But they do. The languages of the forest carry these truths with elegance, because they were shaped by people who do not separate self from place, who do not file away emotion as an inconvenience, who do not confuse forgetting with healing. One elder explained it like this: your language is good for building things, for measuring, for making rules. He paused. Ours is good for remembering what we are made of, and that distinction it echoes, because we've built so much, measured so much, defined the outlines of the visible world with such obsessive precision, but we've forgotten how to feel the world that doesn't need defining, the world that listens, the world that mourns without schedule, the world that even now might still be willing to speak if only we knew the word to say hello. There is a kind of humor in the Amazon that never makes it into books. It doesn't translate well. It doesn't hit like a punchline. It lingers, slow and mischievous, like a vine wrapping around your ankle when you're trying to look important. It comes from the forest itself, from the knowledge that you, the individual, are never fully in control, that what you plan will go sideways, that the gods, or the trees, or your great-aunt spirit still lurking in a fig tree, might have other ideas. And so, people laugh. A woman slips in the mud on her way to perform a ritual. She cackles before anyone else can. The spirits wanted me to be humble, she says, brushing off the embarrassment like dust. A man tries to impress a visiting official with his knowledge of medicinal plants only to be corrected, cheerfully, by a 10-year-old who reminds him the last time he mixed them, he passed out for 2 days. Even the shamans joke, especially the shamans. They speak of the spirit world not with dread, but with a kind of knowing wink. Oh, the forest spirits, one says, they're lazy. You have to bribe them with songs. Another grins, they hate your cologne. That's why your dreams were strange. It's not irreverence, it's intimacy. When you live in constant relationship with things you can't control, you develop humor not as escape, but as acknowledgement. You laugh, not because nothing matters, but because everything doesn't. It's still absurd. There's even a game children play. They leave small offerings in the forest fruit beads, tiny woven dolls, not for each other, for the spirits, the goal, to see if they disappear overnight. If they do, the child is said to be watched by the leaves. It's both compliment and warning. Sometimes the offerings aren't taken. That's funnier. One child once returned to find her doll had been turned upside down. She screamed in delight. The spirit doesn't like her dress, she shouted. The adults laughed with her. Someone began sewing a new one. You see, in these stories, the invisible is not terrifying. It's just inconvenient. It hides your tools. It gives you strange dreams. It makes you say the wrong thing to someone you like. It mocks your pride with misplaced fruit and rainy seasons that arrive early. And through it all, the people laugh. Because the moment you take yourself too seriously, the forest will remind you're a visitor here. Even if you were born in the mud. Even if your ancestors planted the trees. You were part of the joke, not the punchline. Just one more creature, bumbling through the leaves, trying to make meaning out of weather. And sometimes, the spirits laugh back. Sometimes, they leave you a flower you didn't plant, or a snake that watches but does not strike, or a silence that feels like a smirk. And if you're lucky, if you've learnt to listen, you'll laugh too, because what else can you do in a world that dreams behind your back? In the jungle, there are no straight lines. Trails twist, branches block, water appears where it wasn't yesterday. What looked like a shortcut turns into a swamp. What seemed impassable one day becomes the only way home the next. And so, people here do not follow paths. They are found by them. It begins with a feeling. Not a hunch, not the dramatic kind of instinct we romanticize in survival shows. Something quieter, a tickle in the ribs, a memory that doesn't belong to you, a subtle pressure in the feet, as if the ground is guiding rather than resisting. That's how they choose which way to go. Not by compass, not by satellite, but by relationship. Because in this forest, the land is not inert. It is not passive. It remembers. A route that trips you twice may be telling you to slow down. A bird that sings out of season may be warning of strangers. The villagers say, the forest wants to be asked. That's not metaphor. Before big hunts, elders speak to the trees. They offer tobacco, songs, silence, not because they believe the forest is a god, but because they know it listens and expects respect. So when outsiders come with machetes and maps, carving roads like wounds into the skin of the earth, the forest does not stop them, it just forgets them. The roads collapse, the paths overgrow, the signs fall. But those who walk with listening feet, those who move as part of the rhythm, not above it, find ways no map could guess. A hunter may take a path that disappears halfway through and find it again by sunset, not by retracing, but by recognition. He'll say, the ants showed me, not metaphor, just truth. And once you've followed such a path once, it's allowed you understand why the villagers don't build fences, why they don't pave, why they shake their heads at the idea of property lines. Because here, movement isn't conquest, it's conversation. Every step says, may I? Every pause waits for reply. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's not yet. And when it's no, you'll know. Your skin will prickle, the birds will go silent, a branch will snap behind you, but no one will be there. So you turn around. No shame, no anger, just understanding that path wasn't yours. Not today. And tomorrow, it might be waiting again, as a little to the left, past the fallen log, where the light bends like memory. But only if you ask, and only if you're ready to listen. There's a kindness in the Amazon that doesn't announce itself. It isn't grand. It doesn't arrive with ceremony or demand recognition. It lives in gestures, glances, forgotten corners. It hums under things. You see it in the way food is shared, not served, not offered, but simply placed beside you, as if the act of hunger were enough to warrant belonging. You feel it when a child falls, and 10 hands reach out, some to help, some to distract, some just to pat the dirt away without comment. It's not pity, not charity. It's assumption, the unspoken truth, that if you are here, you matter. Even if you're not useful, even if you're tired, even if all you can do is sit by the fire and listen. There is no word for welfare in most of these languages, no term for public assistance, because assistance is not public, it's relational. A woman gives you cassava because you were seen waking late, moving slow. She doesn't ask if you're okay. She doesn't ask for thanks. Later, you'll carry water for her without thinking. Not because you owe her, because it fits. This kind of kindness is not performative. It's ambient, like the smoke, like the hum of insects that form a background to everything. It also extends to the unseen. When a fire is lit, a whisper is sent into the trees. We are here, we are safe. Please join us if you wish. When a baby is born, small offerings are left at the forest's edge, not to a god, but to whoever's listening. Not all spirits are friendly. Some are mischievous, some are angry, some are tired. But kindness, even to them, is part of the contract. You leave a gourd of food for the wandering soul. You sing a song for the tree you must cut. You apologize to the fish you catch out loud. You acknowledge what you take. You offer balance in return. This is not ritual, it's survival and tenderness. The forest is dense, loud, unknowable, but it is also full of gentleness. Not in the Western sense of softness, but in the deeper sense of willingness not to harm unless necessary. Even the jaguar, they say, walks around the shabono if she is not hungry. Even the wasp nest, when spoken to respectfully, can be passed without attack. Even the spirits, when remembered, leave the living in peace. And perhaps this is what we've most forgotten, not just in cities, but in how we think about kindness. We've made it a commodity, a brand, a headline, but here it is quieter. It is a hand on your back when you think you are alone. It is a bowl of water placed where you can reach it before you ask. It is the forest whispering gently, "You are not forgotten." Not everyone stays. Some leave, not because they hate the forest, but because they are called away by hunger, by dreams, by something that flickered on the edge of a transistor radio once, promising electricity and school uniforms and maybe, just maybe, a new kind of future. They walk for days, or ride a boat, or are taken, and eventually they arrive in the city. Not the glowing towers of capital, not the cinematic skyline. A city made of corrugated roofs, satellite dishes, open drains, and the buzzing electricity of a world that doesn't wait for your story. They arrive with calloused feet, old songs stuck behind their teeth, and names that no one pronounces correctly. And the city does not greet them. It barely notices. It folds them into its noise, and yet they survive. They become maids, drivers, security guards, translators, sometimes even students. They send money home, if there is a home left. They whisper their grandmother's name like a prayer, and try not to forget the smell of the river. But even here, in the sprawl, the forest follows them. In the way they pause before entering a building to feel something. In the way they never throw out food, not even the bitter parts. In the way they sing to their children in a language the neighbors don't recognize. And sometimes, when no one is looking, they plant things. Not gardens, not crops, tiny shrines, vines in soda bottles, basil and tobacco and flowers whose names aren't in any urban registry. The neighbors roll their eyes, but the plants grow, and in the kitchen, over cheap rice and fried banana, a story is told not about the city, but about a dream. About a tree that once cried when it was cut. About a fish that turned into a man and taught a woman how to listen. About a boy who followed a spirit through the roots of the earth and came back with a gift he never learned to explain. These stories do not belong in cities, and yet they take root, because memory does not care where you live, because grief does not end when you change your address, because the forest, if you've truly known, it tenters your bones. And once it's there, it does not leave. It changes the way you wait in line. It changes the way you trust someone's silence. It changes the way you look at concrete and still, somehow, see trees. And when someone else speaks your language at a bus stop, or sings a familiar melody under their breath on a walk home from work, you do not ask how they got here. You just nod. And in that nod, a whole village is remembered. A river runs again, and two people, far from everything they knew, share the quiet knowledge. The forest is not gone. It's just dreaming inside you now. The city, for all its noise and reach, is still a guest in the memory of those who've walked the forest. It builds towers, it paves roads, it invents new ways to speak and consume and forget. But even higher among smog and metal and screens, the jungle survives in fragments, in hands, in breath, in the way someone refuses to hurry, even when the light turns green. The children of the forest, now mothers, now construction workers, now students blinking beneath fluorescent lights, carry their old world like a secret chord, a tone that doesn't match the melody of the city, but refuses to go out of tune. They don't always know they're doing it. It shows up in how they tell time, not by clocks, but by hunger, by shadows, by the feel of the air. It shows up in how they mark space, not in square feet, but in relation to trees that no longer stand. This is where the rain would hit hardest, someone says, pointing at a rooftop. There should be birds here, another mutters, looking up at the silence. And sometimes when someone is dying, they remember how to sing, not funeral hymns, not hospital prayers, but the old songs, the ones that were never written, only hummed by grandmothers whose faces they barely remember, and yet whose voices live in their throat like a borrowed wind. These songs are not just mourning, they are return to the circle, the fire, the scent of wet bark and sweat and plantains roasting in coals. The city cannot erase that. It can dull it, yes, cover it in static, bury it under debt and traffic and bureaucracy. But it cannot own it, because the forest taught them a kind of freedom that resists translation. The freedom to laugh at power, the freedom to believe a bird might carry a message, the freedom to grieve without explanation and love without fear of loss. One man, long since relocated, now works nights cleaning a university. He cannot read the books he dusts, but when he hears the sound of rain against the high windows, he closes his eyes and says nothing for a full minute. He remembers where the snakes used to sleep. He remembers the plant his sister used for fever. He remembers his father's hands, how they moved without needing to name anything. That the city cannot take. The forest lives in small resistances, in the refusal to forget, in the way a woman crushes herbs in her palm before speaking, in the way a child draws spirals on a fogged-up bus window, not knowing why. These are not acts of protest, they are acts of presence. They are how the jungle keeps speaking even when no one else is listening. Somewhere, in a city where the heat rises off the pavement like breath, a man writes a letter he never intends to mail. He uses lined paper, a borrowed pen. His handwriting is slow, careful, full of pauses. He begins, to the village, to the river, to the tree that bent over the clearing like a tired elder. He doesn't address it to anyone by name, because names, as he was taught, don't always stay fixed. They shed, they wander like birds or memories. The letter is not urgent. It speaks of the way the city forgets to go dark at night, how the stars here seem fainter, as if embarrassed, how people touch without noticing, how silence costs money. He writes about his job stacking boxes, how each one has a label, how none of them seem to carry anything of real weight. And then he writes of food, how the taste is different, how the sweetness here is sharp, not soft, how the meat doesn't speak, how no one, not once, has handed him something without also giving him a price. He doesn't cry, he is not dramatic, he is just remembering. In the next paragraph, he mentions a bird he saw yesterday. Black wings, yellow eyes, wrong place, wrong time, but it looked at him, and for a second he almost said something out loud in the old language, till until he realized no one nearby would understand, not even himself, fully. The grammar is rusting in his mouth. Still, he writes it down. One word, just one. Then he folds the page. He places it under a chipped cup in a drawer. Not to hide it, not to keep it safe, just to give it a place, because not everything needs to be delivered. Some messages are meant only for the hand that wrote them. Some prayers are answered just by being said. And somewhere perhaps in the soil between sidewalk cracks, perhaps in the crackle of a radio picking up jungle static, something hears him. Something nods, because this too is part of the story. Not everyone who leaves wants to stay gone, and not everyone who stays remembers the way back. But the act of writing, that's a path, not a map, not a demand, just a slow turn toward the part of the self that still listens for frogs at dusk, that still tastes smoke in dreams, that still hopes, quietly, irrationally, that the tree remembers him too. From above, the river still shines. Satellites marvel at its curves, call it lifeblood, run models that simulate its flood cycles, its carbon storage, its resistance to drought. But from the banks, especially near the cities, the water tells a different story. It is thicker now, grayer. It carries plastic in its throat. It murmurs in new metallic tones. Fishermen speak less while casting their nets, not out of reverence, out of grief. The fish are fewer. The old rhythms when the turtles came, when the mud would signal certain spawning patterns, have become guesses. The city has grown teeth. Its garbage reaches farther than its promises. Its cables and roads snake deeper each year, claiming edges it once said were off limits. Conservation zones are drawn like apologies. Protected land is declared and then redeclared, shuffled like cards until no one knows what the terms are anymore. But the river knows. It has seen ink poured into water. It has watched trees fall like sighs. It has heard the silence after protests, when cameras leave and the forest waits to see what is left standing. Still, it moves, because rivers don't stop. They adapt, or they vanish. And so the people who live along it change too. Some take jobs with the very companies building the roads. Some protest, some pray, some plant fast-growing trees in hope of fooling the satellites, and some disappear. Not all at once, not violently. They just slip down smaller tributaries, rebuild further from the noise. They trade coordinates for whispers. They let the jungle hide them again, because hiding here is not defeat. It is strategy. It is continuity. The river does not ask to be saved. It asks to be understood, not in spreadsheets, not in slogans, but in footsteps, in pauses, in the way a boatman listens before setting out, placing a hand in the current, feeling not for depth, but for permission. One woman, now living in a city several hundred miles from her birth village, walks to the riverbank each evening. She doesn't bathe, she doesn't fish, she just sits. Sometimes she brings a bowl of fruit and leaves it by the water, not as a sacrifice. As a reminder, she says the river still knows her name. Not the name on her ID, the name only her mother spoke, once, in the quiet after a storm. A name made of syllables and scent, a name the city cannot spell. And when she hears the river move, just so when the ripples make the same sound they made years ago in a dream, she smiles. Because even here, in the shadow of buildings, the river is still listening, still asking, "Do you remember me?" In cities, silence is rare. It's often mistaken for failure. An awkward pause, a lapse in content, a void to be filled by music, voices, engines, or the glow of a screen. But the silence that comes from the forest is different. It doesn't demand attention. It holds it. It isn't empty. It's listening. People who've lived in the jungle for long enough can tell you, silence means something. When the birds stop, when the frogs fall quiet, when even the insects seem to pause, mid-hum it means the forest is deciding, watching, waiting for you to speak truthfully or not at all. Some learn this the hard way. Outsiders enter with too many questions, too much energy. They narrate, document, analyze, but the silence doesn't respond. And so they leave, declaring that the forest is mute, that the people are shy, that nothing meaningful was found. They were wrong. They just didn't wait long enough to hear it. In the evenings, when the fires burn low and the last laughter fades into breath, there is a moment brief and total when the silence arrives fully. It enters like a friend who needs no introduction. It sits between people who've shared everything and nothing, and asks only that they remain. No performance, no explanation, just presence. Some of the elders say this silence is where the ancestors live now, not in the trees, not in the spirits, but in the space between thoughts, the quiet between stories. The stillness that reminds you there is more here than what you can describe. And the villagers listen, not with their ears, with their stillness. They do not break the silence to impress. They let it hold them. And when the silence ends, when the first crack of a twig or exhale of a sleeping child breaks, it's not a loss. It's a gift. It means the forest is ready again, that the world is still moving, that you've been given one more breath in a place that owes you nothing. This is perhaps the hardest lesson the jungle teaches, that not all meaning is meant to be spoken, that not all stories end in a climax, that some truths only visit when you've stopped trying to make them useful. And maybe, in our own lives, that's the silence we fear most, not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything we've forgotten how to name. So if you ever find yourself in that kind of silence in a forest, in a village, in your room at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, don't rush to fill it. Sit with it. Let it know you're still listening, and it may tell you something, not in words, but in memory. Not every eye in the jungle blinks like yours. Some remain steady, unmoving, ancient even in youth. At night, when the fire dims and the darkness pushes against the thin perimeter of human warmth, those eyes begin to shine. 2 yellow orbs, low to the ground, not threatening, not welcome, just there. The villagers do not panic. They don't reach for weapons. They don't raise their voices. They whisper. They wait. Because they know, if you stare too hard at the forest, it will stare back. The animal behind the eyes could be anything. A jaguar, a tapir, a monkey that learned not to blink, or something older, something that lives in stories but has no name in the language of cities. You are not meant to know. You are meant to respect. There is a word in one local tongue that means the feeling of being observed by something that has already judged you. It doesn't imply fear. More like ... acceptance. To be seen by the forest is to be measured by a different standard. It doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care what side you are on. It cares whether you moved gently, whether you fed the fire with care, whether you remembered to thank the river after you bathed. These are the tests, and the animals. They are the examiners, not all the time, just in moments like this, when you are tired, exposed, unsure of whether the crunch behind the trees is curiosity or hunger. The villagers tell stories about those who didn't listen. One man once tried to chase a jaguar that circled too close to the shore. He returned an hour later without his voice. Not from injury, there was no blood, no wound, just a silence that stayed with him until the day he died. They say the forest took his language in exchange for his life. It was a fair trade. So now, when the eyes appear, they are greeted, sometimes with a song, sometimes with silence, sometimes just with a bowl of food left near the edge, turned away so as not to offend. And when the eyes blink, or vanish, or drift back into the trees, everyone relaxes, not because danger has passed, but because balance has been acknowledged. The animal was watching, and it chose to leave. What that means is not said, but everyone understands, because in this place, being watched is not a violation. It is an invitation to remember that you are not the center, that your story is not the only one unfolding, that somewhere in the dark, something older is still writing its version without paper, without pen, but with perfect, patient memory. There's always one child in the village who seems to carry too much sky in their eyes, who listens more than they speak, who walks like they're following footsteps no one else can see. They aren't chosen, they aren't trained, but the elders notice. So do the animals. In this story, that child was a girl, maybe 9, maybe 11. Age in the forest is a loose arrangement of seasons and scars. She was quiet, but not shy. She didn't avoid others. She just listened longer than necessary. She was the one who remembered which fruit trees were blooming early, who noticed when the birds stopped singing a second before the first raindrop, who once pointed at the fire and said, plainly, there will be a birth tonight. There was, not in the village, in the trees, a sloth hanging just beyond the edge of human space, groaning softly into the night, while a small, damp shape found its first breath. No one had told her, she just knew. When asked how, she'd shrugged. It was waiting. Sometimes she spoke to the rain, not prayed, not begged, spoke as if it were an older cousin, slightly annoying but ultimately kind. She'd hold her hand out before storms and say, "You're early again," or "Don't soak the sleeping ones, please." It didn't always listen, but sometimes it did. One night, a storm circled the village, loud, angry, like a drunk giant tripping through trees. The wind howled, roofs threatened to lift. The girl stepped outside, barefoot, thin. Everyone shouted for her to return. She didn't flinch. She raised both arms and stood still, not challenging, just listening. And the rain, which had begun to pound, slowed, shifted. It curved, bent around the village like a shawl being wrapped, leaving the center untouched. By morning, the leaves were soaked, but no homes had flooded. The elders nodded, said nothing. They knew she wasn't a shaman. Not yet. She was still made of questions. But the rain had answered her, and once the rain answers, it doesn't forget. Years later, when she left the village, walked into the city with a plastic bag and a song in her throat, the trees didn't stop her. But the next storm came late, almost as if it missed her. And somewhere, in a village far away, a child woke up with a feeling they couldn't name. They walked to the edge of the trees, held out their hand, and whispered, "I remember you." Before there were GPS systems, before maps were inked by outsiders who looked down from satellites and saw rivers like veins to be charted, there were stories. And those stories were the map. Not just tales to pass time, but living, breathing coordinates encoded in metaphor and memory. You wanted to know how to find a certain tree that bore fruit during the third moon of the wet season. You didn't ask for directions, you asked for a story. Someone would smile and begin. There was a man who walked too far, chasing the shadow of a deer. And by the end of the tale, you would know where the fruit was, because you would have felt the journey. These stories didn't use distance in kilometers, they used effort. How far is it? Someone asks. 3 songs if you're rested. 5 if you're sad. They didn't say turn left at the big rock. They said, follow where the bird forgets its own name. And somehow, you got there, because you were being taught more than direction. You were being taught attunement to sound, to fatigue, to wonder. Even now, some villagers close their eyes when describing how to reach a place. They see not terrain, but moments. A patch of sun where a cousin kissed someone once. A tree whose branch split after a storm. A feeling of being watched that means you're close. This is geography woven with memory. It is not efficient, but it is true, and it's disappearing. As roads come, as coordinates replace stories, something is lost. Not just knowledge, but a kind of emotional logic. A way of understanding that where you are is not separate from who you are. One elder, when asked to help update a digital map, refused. He said, I can give you the points, but I can't give you the reasons. And that is the tragedy of modern mapping. It records everything except meaning. The tree becomes a green dot. The river becomes a blue line. The sacred hill becomes a name in a foreign language, mispronounced, passed over. But the villagers remember. Even those who leave, who board boats and buses and find themselves in cities where streets don't tell stories they remember in their bodies. A tightness in the chest when they smell a certain kind of smoke. A dream that shows a path that no longer exists. A hesitation before stepping into a place that the maps say is empty. Because something in them still walks by stories. Still turns left at the sound of laughter. Still measures distance and longing. And still believes, deep down, that the world can be navigated not just by where it ends, but by where it hurts. Languages, like rivers, can vanish, not all at once, not loudly, but drip by drip, syllable by syllable, until what once felt like breath now tastes like absence. This is happening in the Amazon, not everywhere, not every day, but slowly like erosion in the corners of the mind. A grandmother dies, and with her 47 words no one else remembers. A child goes to a school where her mother tongue is called incorrect. A father, trying to find work in the city, stops speaking the old way just for now, just until things settle. But they never really do. And so the language waits, not in books, not in policy, in bodies. In the jaw that still moves a certain way when crying. In the rhythm of a lullaby hummed by someone too tired to speak. In the pauses between thoughts that come from a grammar no longer spoken, but still lived. One linguist tried to catalogue a local dialect. She came with notebooks, audio recorders, eager eyes. She wanted to preserve it, but the words resisted. Not the people. The words. They refused to be spoken under pressure. They scattered when translated. They changed depending on who was listening. She was frustrated, until one elder laughed and said, "You cannot trap a river in a bottle and expect it to sing." She stopped recording after that. Instead, she sat by the fire each night, ate in silence. Listened to stories not meant to be captured, but shared. And slowly the words returned. Not all of them, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to understand that some languages do not die, they hide. They wait for the right breath, the right grief, the right song hummed without thinking while washing clothes in a basin. They survive in dreams, in touch, in the way two siblings look at each other when someone from the government is asking questions and they know not to speak. This is not resistance, it is care, because to speak a dying language is to hold open a door, not to the past, to a version of the present where not everything is for sale, where not every sentence has to explain itself, where meaning can live in tone, in silence, in the crackle of fire and the word for when you love someone too much to say it out loud. That word exists, by the way. It doesn't translate, it doesn't need to, because the people who carry it still speak with their eyes. And the language, soft, stubborn, sacred, still waits in the mouth. It wasn't supposed to be memorable. Just another day in the dry season, humid, thick with the scent of dust and heat. Children were playing. Fires were being lit for cooking. Someone was mending a fishing net near the edge of the village, humming an old song whose words had long since worn down to vowels. And then the sky turned orange. Not soft, sunset orange, violent, unnatural, as if something sacred had been bruised. The villagers looked up and said nothing for a long moment, because they understood. It wasn't a sign. It was a consequence. Somewhere nearby, maybe far, maybe too close, something large was burning. A patch of forest cleared too fast. A fire meant for farmland that jumped the boundary. Or maybe it was intentional. These days, it often is. The animals moved first. Birds flying without formation. Monkeys crying low and anxious. Even the insects shifted tone. Then came the smell. Not smoke, not fire. Loss, a thick, choking scent of something alive, becoming memory. And the sky, for hours, held that orange like an accusation, like a fever, like a warning that had already come too late. Children asked if the sun was sick. Elders whispered stories they hadn't told in years. One spoke of the time the sky turned this color before a great migration. Another remembered a fire that took an entire grove and the spirits that had lived inside it. No one asked who started it. Everyone already knew. And yet, no panic. Because panic is for those who believe they still have control. What the villagers felt was older, deeper, recognition. The forest was bleeding, and like all wounds, it would either heal the scar. That night, the firelight felt dimmer, not for lack of wood, but because the shadows were longer, and the silence fuller. Someone sang, softly, off-key, a song for the trees that hadn't burned yet. Not hope, not resistance, just acknowledgement. Because when the sky turns orange and the world shifts out of its own rhythm, what you do next matters. Not for saving the planet, but for telling it, I saw you, I'm still here. I won't forget this color. And long after the sky faded back to its dull city gray, the children remembered that day. They still draw it, not with flames, with trees outlined in gold, with birds flying the wrong direction, with the sun looking over its shoulder, as if even it wanted to leave. In every village, there's a fire that doesn't burn to cook. It's small, quiet, tucked near the edge of the communal space, never center stage. Sometimes no one tends it for hours. Sometimes someone sits beside it without speaking. It is not ceremonial. It is remnant. This is the fire that has outlasted other fires. The one sparked from embers carried in gourds when the tribe moved generations ago. The one that was never allowed to go out, not because it's sacred, but because it's familiar. It's the fire that holds memory, not warmth. And on certain nights, especially when the air is too still, or someone has died, or someone has returned after a long time away, becomes something else, not larger, just present. People gather around it, as they always have. Not many, not planned. A teenager sitting with her knees drawn up, an elder with a cracked mug, a baby in a sling, half asleep. Someone who was angry yesterday, now quiet. No one speaks. Or if they do, they speak softly, with sentences that trail off and aren't picked back up. This fire doesn't demand attention. It offers a pause, and in that pause, something unfolds. Maybe a memory, maybe a realization, maybe just the feeling that you are not entirely alone. One man once sat beside this fire for 4 nights in a row after losing his wife. He didn't cry, he didn't pray, he just sat. On the 5th night, a small boy sat next to him and fell asleep against his shoulder. That was it, no words. The man stood up the next morning and went back to work. The fire hadn't fixed anything. It had simply waited with him. That's its purpose, to witness, to be the thing that does not move when everything else is falling apart. It is the opposite of the modern world's urgency. It has no task, no performance, no closing hours. It will still be here when your grief softens. It will still be here when your joy burns too bright and needs a place to land. It will still be here when no one remembers why it was first lit. Because this is what some fires do. They don't warm your hands. They warm the space around absence. And somehow, that's enough. In the forest, not all shadows are cast by objects. Some appear where they shouldn't. No tree above, no rock beside. Just a shift in the light, a sudden dimming, a coolness against your back. A sense that something is standing with you, though nothing moves. The villagers don't call these shadows ghosts. That word is too narrow. They call them reminders. They say, if a shadow follows you, speak gently. If it stands still, don't. It's not fear, it's etiquette. Because not all things in the forest belong to categories. Some are between, not spirits, not animals, not memories, but carriers of the unnamed, the forest's old regrets, echoes of decisions no longer remembered, but not forgiven either. And sometimes these shadows appear when no one else will. A woman walking to the river alone to grieve a miscarriage sees a darkness keeping pace beside her, not ominous, not comforting, just present. A child lost for hours is found calm and unafraid. I wasn't alone, he says, though no one else was near. A hunter turns back before entering a clearing because a shape without source blocked his path for only a second. And that was enough. The shadows do not speak, they do not hurt, but they hold a kind of memory that does not need words. The villagers know not to thank them. Thanks implies debt, and the shadows ask for nothing, only space, and maybe silence. Outsiders, when they hear these stories, often ask, but what are they? The villagers shrugged. If you knew that, one says, you'd stop seeing them, because some truths vanish when named. Some presences only visit those who do not try to possess. And if you're lucky, truly lucky, you'll feel one, just once. Not during danger, not in ecstasy, but in the quiet middle, when you're tired and alone and not expecting meaning. It will settle beside you, not cold, not warm. And for a moment, you will remember a sadness you never lived, a song you never learned, a forgiveness you didn't know you were waiting for. Then the light will change, the shadow will be gone, and you will continue on, not braver, not wiser, just ... seen. There is a ritual rarely performed now that once welcomed newborns to the world, not with flowers, not with formal prayers, with questions. The child would be held by someone not related to them, someone trusted, but not family. And as the village gathered, the child's name would be whispered. Not the public name, the first name, the one that would never be written, the one known only to the mother, the midwife, and the forest. Then the questions would begin, softly, gently, directed not at the child but around them. What scent will calm you? What bird will you trust? What part of the night will make you feel safe? These weren't tests, they were invitations. Because in this culture, a child isn't just a person, they are a place the world will happen through. And so naming wasn't about identity, it was about orientation. Where do you begin? Where do you return? Where does your silence go when you're afraid? The villagers believe every child brings a pattern, not a destiny, a rhythm, a way the air shifts when they're near, a way the insects hum around them. And the name, the real name, was meant to match that rhythm, not control it, align with it. Sometimes, the first name would never be spoken aloud again. It would live in gestures, in nicknames, in the way someone tied their satchel or folded their sleeping mat. It would be protected like a seed. Because power, here, doesn't come from display. It comes from harmony. From the quiet knowledge that you were seen before you could speak. That your place in the forest was acknowledged, not with ceremony, but with questions no one needed answered. One elder recalled his naming. He remembered the woman who held him, saying, "This one will follow the second wind, not the first." He didn't know what it meant. But decades later, lost in a city, unsure of what he believed anymore, he stood on a balcony and felt a breeze. Not the hot, stale gust that came first. The second, cool late, tasting of somewhere else. And in that moment, he remembered who he was. Not by name, by alignment. By the feel of the world when it knows you're listening. And perhaps that's what naming is meant to be, not a label, not a command, but a moment of belonging. A gesture toward the truth that even in a forest of 10 million voices, yours was expected. In the forest, dreams are not private. They are not dismissed, not scribbled into journals, not shrugged off with coffee and excuses. They are listened to, because often the dream knows before you do. It arrives quiet but sure, like the first drop of rain on a leaf long before the storm. You might dream of a jaguar walking backwards, or a river that climbs a tree, or your grandmother, long dead, standing with wet hands, saying nothing. When this happens, you tell someone, not for interpretation, for witness. And the listener, often an elder or someone with clouded eyes, does not explain. They nod. They ask what you ate. They ask what phase the moon was in. And sometimes they just say, "Be gentle today." Not every dream is a message, but every dream is a place you visited. And some places, do not forget who came. There are dreams that predict storms, deaths, births, but more often, dreams here are reminders of things you're avoiding, of feelings you've buried, of voices you promised to remember but have let fade. Children are taught this young, to report their dreams before breakfast, not for reward, not for analysis, to release them, because a dream not spoken becomes a burden. It thickens in the chest. It changes your walk. It confuses the dogs. And when enough people in the village dream of the same thing, fire, a bird, a face with no eyes, the elders take note. They do not panic. They prepare. They light a second fire. They hum the old songs louder. They greet the forest more politely. Because sometimes the dream speaks before the danger does. And sometimes the dream is the danger. There was once a boy who dreamed of himself, old and dying, in a city with no trees. He didn't know what it meant, but he woke up crying. He spent the next week planting saplings everywhere, even in places they wouldn't grow. He didn't explain. He just wanted to give the dream a different ending. Years later, when he did move to the city, he brought seeds. Not hope, not nostalgia, just rhythm. A way to remind himself each time he dreamed of the forest's original language, the one that speaks softly, but never by accident. In many Amazonian villages, there is no formal word for goodbye. Not really. There are phrases that imply parting. Words for travel, for change, for absence. But the idea of finality, the closed door, the sealed envelope, the parting line that leaves nothing behind, that idea doesn't quite fit here. Instead, they say things like, "I'll walk with you a while," or "Don't forget the way back," or simply, "Until your shadow returns." Because partying in this place is not severance, it is stretching. Like the way the sun pulls the light before it lets it go. Like the way a root continues underground, long after the tree seems to end. People leave. They always have. To trade, to learn, to escape, to grieve. But the village does not erase them. There's always a place by the fire. There's always someone who remembers their laugh. And even if their name fades, the path their feet wore into the earth stays a little softer, a little more willing. Goodbyes, then, are not moments. They are seasons. They unfold slowly. They ripple backward. They echo in the way someone you've never met looks at you like you're familiar. And when someone dies, it's much the same. There is mourning, yes. Wailing, sometimes. Silence, more often. But no one says, "He is gone." They say, "He walks differently now," or "She has joined the listening ones." And in this, there is comfort. Not the comfort of denial, the comfort of continuity. That we are not separate from what came before. That our voices, our errors, our kindnesses, they linger in fruit, in laughter, in someone else's dream. So if you're listening to this here now, wherever you aren't, you are feeling far from yourself, or from home, or from someone you once loved, let this be your goodbye. Not to end the feeling, not to close the story, but to acknowledge you were here. You listened, you let the forest into your thoughts. And maybe, just maybe, the forest remembers you now. Not your name, not your face, but your attention. And that is enough. That has always been enough. Thank you for watching. Or maybe for listening. Or just for lying there with this on in the background while your thoughts wandered. That's okay too. I hope tonight's story gave you something to hold, a feeling, a memory, a moment of stillness. And if not, I hope it at least kept you company for a while. If you enjoyed this journey, feel free to subscribe. Not because it's expected, but because you're welcome here anytime. There's always room by the fire. Until next time, sleep gently, and may your dreams speak kindly. Good night.